Okay, well, once again, welcome. I'm a few new faces, so just welcome to the History Capstones this afternoon. We will be going until 6:30 tonight, so be sure and come back for as many as you can. There's food out in the hall. The form that I handed out is an assessment form. Please fill these out thoughtfully. And if you're here for credit for a class, there's a sign-up sheet out in the lobby. Our next presenter is Christopher Parrack, and I will let you, Christopher, introduce your topic.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Christopher Parrack, and I'm here to speak today on the topic of living history and how it is essential in the preservation of stories left behind by history, specifically those that remain silent in history. Dear Parker, Serve and Millie arrived on yesterday in the cars, and I deposited $475 to your credit in the Bank of the Valley of Charlestown, being payment in full for said servant. Enclosed herewith, please find the certificate of deposit for the above amount, on receipt of which, please send me the bill of sale stating the age, that she is a slave for life, that she is sold as sound and healthy. These precautions are probably not necessary between friends, such as you and I. However, she seems to have a very bad cough, but she said she has had all winter. But as she looks healthy, I presume nothing to be feared from it. I received a letter today from Mother. She mentioned that the family were all well, except poor Dick, who had been suffering greatly from his hip. So much as to make it necessary to carry him from his bed to his chair. He is, however, suffering little pain separation, having taken place, and part been opened. My children are still suffering with whooping cough, particularly the two young ones. From the boys in California, we have not heard since last I saw you, except indirectly through others. Please present my kindest regards to Cousin Ava, in which my wife joins, and believe me as ever, yours sincerely, J.E.P. Dangerfield. Now, I read you that letter between the two gentlemen because of the woman mentioned in the letter. The woman's name is Millie. Millie is a slave. Millie is a silent voice. Now, what exactly do I mean by silent voice? Well, there are no records of her. The only reason we know anything about her is because she exists within this letter by someone who is very high up in his town. This man is J.P. Dangerfield. He is the paymaster of the Army of Harper's Ferry in 1859, and he is purchasing Millie from Judge Richard Parker in Charlestown, Virginia at this time. However, the reason she's a silent voice is once this letter in 1859 is passed, there are no records of Millie. No one knows what happened to her. One of the reasons possibly could be the fact that at that time, slaves were not considered by name in any records or censuses. They were considered by numbers, by keeping track by a number, and that's it. My argument today is living history helps preserve, interpret, and educate the general public on stories and history that will remain unknown by the public. Without living history, voices like Millie's and hundreds of thousands of others like hers will be lost to the public. However, to show how living history does not only preserve these stories and those previously silenced, but it gives back to the public to benefit from, I have to talk about how the public gains from living history. Well, number one, living history helps engage the audience. Living history is about making connections, making the story stick, making it memorable, making it meaningful, make them remember it and relate to it. Many of the stories in the lives that are the silent voices, that are those that we can relate to. Those are the working in the lower classes. Those who at the time in early America might have been illiterate, but they would be doing the same day-to-day jobs that such as you and I may be in our day-to-day lives. Being engaged in history is to connect with it and to connect with the past, which then also helps us progress into the present. As of course, when looking through history, everyone has a point they connect to or a person or event they connect to. It's something you hold on to, it's something they immediately are drawn to when they search for something throughout history or a certain someone. Could it be a family member? Could it be a certain event? Could it be a certain era that fascinates them? Living history helps connect them with that by giving them a sense of place almost, or a sense of belonging, gives them a sense of shoes to fill, and it gives them possibly a door into what could have been their ancestors and their lives. Living history makes everything significant and meaningful. It's a dynamic, engaging activity meant to have something for everyone and meant to bring something out in every way. Many things about living history is it's meant to make you think in possible ways that you might not think about before. As I would say during my internship many times, I'm just a storyteller. You choose the ending. It is the goal of the interpreter to tell the facts and let the audience choose how to conclude it and how they interpret it in the end, how they will then apply it to their own lives. And of course, the final thing is that living history helps present the work of academics. One of the more extensive points of living history is the development and the interpretation and the research behind it all. Every tour interpretation that is ever given is researched heavily and built very carefully. And from then, it's progressively built on and taken away from. It never stops evolving. It always changes. It never is constant. One of the ways that living history helps connect both the public history and academic history is that many of the research that living historians use is research already done by academic historians. And so in a way, academic historians will research and compile it all together in a source. A living historian will find that source and then compile it into an even smaller form for the public. And then the same knowledge is then given out to the public in mass without even having to pick up that book or listen to a lecture. Now, why I chose this topic, of course. I chose this out of which history was my topic because over my internship in Harper's Ferry in 2016 summer, one of the things we were required to do was to give guided tours of the public over the summer. One of the stories we told was Millie's, as I read in the letter earlier. When telling the audiences their story at times, many people would ask what happened to her. Well, as I said before, the problem is no one knows because there are no records that contain anything else on her, and from them we can only speculate what happened in the end. Well, after realizing how little we know of Millie's story, it helped me put in the context of trying to imagine just the fact that from that early American era alone, there are hundreds of thousands of voices just like hers that were silenced and that were oppressed and that were not able to be given a voice in history that is able to be heard easily to this day. Living history makes things significant and meaningful to all, whether by letting them see it, hear it, smell it, or be right in the middle of the program. It gets the visitor active and it gets them learning about what maybe could have been them if they had lived at that time. It's essential in today's society to help keep the public connected to the past, as I said earlier, keep maybe moving them progressively into the present. However, one of the most fascinating parts of Millie's story is not actually the fact that she was a slave, but the story behind it. Because there is a fact and there is a possibility that Millie could have been faking that cough. Now, I know that sounds a little off book a little bit, but there's a couple things in the letter I want to maybe point your mind back to. Number one, J.P. Dangerfield and Richard Parker are both highly respected officials in their towns. One's a judge, a very respected judge in Charlestown, Virginia. The other is a high-up government official in the town of Harper's Ferry. At the same time, I will pull you back to the line where it says these precautions are probably not necessary between you and I. Well, how could that possibly be? Maybe they're friends. So number one, they're high-up officials in their respective towns. They're very respected, well-mannered. Number two, they're friends. Both those two things lead to someone saying that they would not sell someone damaged goods. And at that time, having a cough such as Millie supposedly had is an early sign of tuberculosis, which is a life-threatening disease that definitely does kill. And at the same time, it would give J.P. Dangerfield a loss in his money. So why would Richard Parker sell another highly respected official and a friend damaged goods? Well, he wouldn't, which is why the Park Service themselves believe that Millie was possibly faking the cough as a way to rebel against her enslavement in Harper's Ferry under J.P. Dangerfield. However, as I said, we don't know if that was possibly the case. All we know is that after 1859, she disappears. There's no records of her anymore. We don't know taking the call, whether she actually did die, whether she survived the war, whether she became free in the end. No one knows. For this paper, I chose 5 specific programs of living history, both public and private. My first one is Harpers Ferry National Historical Park in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. My focus at Harpers Ferry was to discover stories and events pertaining to civilian life during the war and before the war and after the war. I wanted to focus on trying to find stories of slaves and servants within the town and around the town. And I also wanted to focus on seeing if I could find any stories of women and their struggles in town during the occupation under military rule and even before and after as well. My next one is Appomattox Courthouse National Historical Park in Appomattox, Virginia. Now, contrary to Harpers Ferry, which is more the beginning of the war, Appomattox, of course, is the end. It's post-Civil War into the Reconstruction era. So my focus for Appomattox changed because I wanted to look at more the views of the civilians, of course, after the war, having lived through it. What were their thoughts on it? What did they take away from it? At the same time, we've also got possible newly emancipated slaves and servants. It just happens, actually, that there was a servant in Appomattox named Millie Craig in 1865. She was emancipated, but stays on as a nanny to the kids of the house that the last cannon shots are fired from in Appomattox. Now, is she most likely the same Millie from Harpers Ferry? Probably not, but of course, we'll never know most likely. But the fact that it could possibly be that is once again just another version of silent voices. And then finally, I also looked into possible voices of former Confederate soldiers who have they've now lost the war that they dedicated their lives to, many of them. And they are now having to live under Reconstruction, which for them is a very oppressive and distressing era for many. Next site I looked at was Connor Prairie out in Fisher, Indiana. Now, Connor Prairie is a little bit different because, number one, it's a private site. Number two, it's the frontier. So at this time when looking at it, I looked more for how citizens came acclimated to frontier life. Many of them probably fled to the frontier at that time for a new life. Many lower class, many who probably could, maybe, who knows, could not read or write. They went out there because they had skills and they knew that they could use those skills and make a life for themselves out west rather than in the east anymore. At the same time, could be immigrants just coming over from Europe to the New World to them. The frontier is a whole new world, a whole new set of opportunities for former slaves, for women, and for immigrants. My next side I look at is found throughout my project, my paper, that living history does preserve, present, and interpret and engage the audience in stories that interact with the silent voices of history. And without living history, many of these voices and these stories that some of us know very well now, we would never even heard of, nor would we blink an eye at. My sources, primary-wise, my main source I used was my internship journal for my own internship at Harpers Ferry National Historic Park 2016. I use a lot of my day-to-day basis notes on there for my paper. I also use Harpers Ferry's National Historical Volunteer Guidebook because it gives a very brief intro into what is living history. So a lot of the basics and things that I pulled from my paper, I pulled from the guidebook. Then I went to the National Parks Living History Guidelines themselves for, rather than just a parks version of their living history guidelines, the national standards for living history. And then, of course, the letter between Richard Parker and J.P. Dangerfield, which is located in the Boyd Stutler letter collection. And then finally, another one I used was John Brown, 1800-1859, a biography 50 years later by Oswald Villard. And that one, I pulled out another snippet of a letter from one of John Brown's raiders, Dangerfield Newby. For secondary history, effective costume interpretation and enactment in museums historic sites by David B. Allison. At the same time, I also use